My name's Phil Silverstone. I'm the General Manager of Eventbrite in Australia and New Zealand. Eventbrite's one of the world's largest ticketing companies. We help power over 2 million events in 2015 and over 5,000 music events in Australia in the last 12 months.
Hi, Chris Carey. I'm the guy with the funny accent from far, far away. I run a company called Media Insight Consulting, catchy name. We're really good with numbers and really bad at naming stuff. And so here we're Phil to present the the Australian Music Consumer Report, catchily named again. And so the plan for today is to take you through some research we've done, partnered on, recently carried out in Australia, to try and shed some light on what consumers think, what they're interested in, and to help you kind of understand the marketplace we're operating in. Before we dive into that, let's just set the scene on the Aussie market. 2015 recorded music grew, so globally recorded music grew about 3%, Australia was up about 5%. Globally, digital overtook physical for the first time in 2015. Australia was a bit ahead of the curve, 2013, you're seeing growth there. And what you're seeing generally, I mean, we know all this, but physical declining, downloads now starting to fall and can fall quite quickly. But meanwhile, streaming's doubled in size and now accounts for 14% of industry revenue in Australia. And with quite a lot of headroom for growth there. So streaming's it's got some challenges. There are some questions around. I think there's exclusives are obviously kicking around. It's an interesting challenge. And the one that always bugs me, I think, if you be the grumpy Brit for 30 seconds, we always say that consumers not enough people are streaming, the price is too high. And then you go into a different room, have the same conversation about the same topic and conclude that artists aren't getting paid enough from streaming. I kind of feel like one way or the other, someone's got to pay more to get more out. You've got to put more in the funnel, or make sure at least it's coming through transparently. So there's some interesting stuff for streaming. Meanwhile, live's been doing all right, Phil.
Yeah, look, we see sustained growth in live music. So in Australia, across the period 2008 to 2014, there's a 42% growth in revenue derived from live music, and a 17% growth in attendance. And so whilst that's growing, there's a specific trend in festivals as well. We've had some headline names that have folded, but that doesn't represent an underlying decrease in demand. To the contrary, demand is booming. Rather, it's a shift more from mainstream to boutique. And so across live and recorded, we're seeing an evolution in the framework of music consumption in Australia. And as an industry, it's therefore obviously very important to try and understand this. And we live in a world where with big data, we know more about music consumers than we ever have. But the challenge of big data is there's so much of it, and so how do you sift through it to get something meaningful out of it? And that's what we've attempted to do today. And so today we're going to talk about 3 trends that we've identified and some of the takeaways for the industry of those.
Perfect. I'd realised I didn't actually explain what I do. Everyone knows Eventbrite. So I should probably say Media Insight Consulting is a big data and consumer survey kind of hub. And in a former life, I was Global Insight Director at Universal and EMI, doing lots of surveys and lots of big data stuff, just so you don't worry for the credibility of what's about to come. Or you might think major label evil, we'll worry about that over a beer. The other thing to say, so this was research of 2,000 people carried out about a month and a half ago, representative of the wider Australian population, so it's not just music fans, this is everybody in the population, representative of the age splits and gender splits and kind of demographic splits of the Australian population, just to get the boring kind of disclaimer out of the way. If anyone wants to argue about sample size, Z stats, I'm here all week. So trend number 1, passion without paying. So there is a challenge for the music industry. There's great news for the music industry. Australians are passionate about music. 40% of the population would agree with the statement, music is my life, my number 1 passion. That's fantastic, that's a great opportunity. That is high compared to a world average. The dynamic you've got, that big bar in the middle, so this is one of about 2 charts you'll see today, maybe 1 of 3. We should say there's a much longer report which is available online through the Eventbrite blog. So if you're worrying about scribbling numbers down, don't worry, it's all there for you with a bit more detail behind it as well. The problem is this middle bar that I'm going to stand under because I really can't reach that. I like music, but I don't pay for it. I don't spend any money on it. That's a challenge. That's almost, it's not a disaster because I like it, it's good. But getting those guys to part with cash is going to be one of the key opportunities, I think, going forward.
Yeah, so we dug into that a bit, and we found the worst offenders were young females, so 16 to 24-year-old females, closely followed by young males in the 25 to 34-year-old category. And as Chris said, these guys are no less passionate about music. In fact, they're probably more passionate about music. But why then is that? And so they're still consuming music, they're just doing it for free. And so we look then, where do they consume it? No surprise that one of the primary channels there is YouTube. And the challenge for the industry of getting people to pay for digital recorded music is not a new one. On the arrival of Napster around the turn of the century, all of a sudden music was available in unprecedented volumes with ease of access, and for the most part, for free. The days of getting a CD and having to go around to your mate's house and all gathering around and listening it together, they're long gone. Now, thankfully, streaming has come along, and platforms like iTunes, like Spotify, Pandora, have helped to drive revenue out of that. And as Chris mentioned earlier, with streaming as only 14% of music consumption in Australia, there's still upside for the industry there. But the challenge for those streaming platforms then is the right-hand side of this graph. And so with access being so universal, it's really about how do you get these more passive music consumers to be more passionate and engage more deeply. And so it's about helping them to sift through this ocean of music content and find more of the bands that they love and engage with music on a deeper level.
Absolutely, and how you drive that depth as well on streaming services, how you get someone to engage not just with a playlist where they hear your music, but actually engage more deeply with your artist. One of the other challenges you've got with music is that I think music's got a huge perceived value problem. So I've got a real objection that people say that streaming is too much. So £10 a month in the UK, $12 a month in Australia, it's too expensive. Well, have you had a cup of coffee recently? How expensive is it? But the one that gets me is that pay TV, you can pay a lot to Foxtel for an incomplete offering. They don't have all the films, they don't have all the sport, there's a lot of stuff they don't have. And they've got adverts everywhere. Why is it that you can't sell music for a fraction of the price, all the music in the world, with no adverts? I feel like something's wrong there. At the other end of the spectrum, gaming is making a lot of money selling virtual merchandise. I mean, so I'm meant to be a rational economist. That's meant to be my credentials for being here, so don't discount everything else I say when I admit this. But FIFA, football game, soccer, sorry. You can get these trading cards, and so I've managed to spend £50 in game, so not quite $100, but close to, post-Brexit, close to. And I've managed to spend 50 quid to let me have a random selection of players which I then play against other people with. These are players I can get in-game, they exist in the game, there's no actual effort, energy or anything that goes into making those available to me. And yet I parted with 50 quid to kind of open the football packs like a small child and get really excited and then trade this guy for that guy. And you look at it and go, £50. Nonetheless, they are making a giant margin out of giving the consumer exactly what they want. Irrational though it might be, they find out what it is that makes someone tick, whether it's impatience or just a kind of a varied experience, and they make money out of that. There's opportunity for music maybe to understand their fans a little better, and that's what we're trying to do today. So, converting passion into revenue is the key thing. What can music do? I spent too long talking about gaming, so I'll get through this quite quickly. There are three things for music. One is taking people who are already spending, getting them to spend more. Live music's done a particularly strong job of this with kind of at the events, spend growing nicely over time. And we talk a lot about superfans and what can you sell them, giving them deluxe products. I think that we're all pretty well versed on. The risk is that you can saturate your superfans. And of course your superfan might be a superfan of 5 artists, and so you've got to actually look to them to grow the market, and we'll look at that in a minute, about bringing people into the fold who are not currently spending on music. How can you meet them somewhere? So at the moment the streaming market's not very segmented, it's a flat price point for an all-you-can-eat offering. Maybe you don't need all-you-can-eat. Would people pay a sum of money for a smaller offering, more curated possibly? And then the last one is about B2B revenues. Given people are passionate about music but they don't like paying for it, is there a place for working more closely with brands, be it soundtracking brands, be it kind of sonic identities for brands, or whether it's simply bands putting on, bands? Talk about bands a lot. Brands putting on festivals and sponsorship, that kind of opportunity. Again, it's got to be authentic, it's got to be done right. But I think in a world where consumers aren't willing to pay, or some consumers aren't willing to pay, once you've exhausted that, you've got to look outside of the consumer budget as well. So
trend number 2, the experiences generation. And so we look at this as 16 to 34-year-olds. And it's no surprise to see that this generation, on the left-hand side there, use new media as their primary method of consuming recorded music. And it's because, Napster came around in 1999, they've known no different. And so for millennials, 25 to 34, 75% of them use new media, and that's things like YouTube, digital streaming, to consume music as their primary method. And for the younger generation, Gen Z, 86%.
I mean, the stark contrast in those, you think there's only a 10-year gap between those two groups, and yet you've got a massive distinction between the lack of appetite for old media. Now, what the industry again does, we talk a lot about the next generation who's coming through and all that kind of interesting, cool tech stuff. We completely ignore that big orange bit on the right-hand side of people actually who are that bit older but are still thoroughly engaged with music. One of my big frustrations with the industry is that kind of CDs are dead, we said in 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. 2015, digital finally overtook physical. There's a risk with us that we rush to what's next because we can see it, we're excited about it, we kind of want to be ready for what's next, but actually to not rush away from other consumers who are already in the market, have got an existing buying habit, have got disposable income, have got an appetite for music. And I think we probably could do well to look after that group possibly a little better than we do and to focus on them a little more. I think this backs that up.
Yeah, so as Chris said, certainly our point here is not to dismiss, I'm reluctant to call it the older generations because I fit in one of those, but...
I deliberately didn't call them anything, I just kind of talked.
the ones like third, fourth, fifth, sixth, to the right. But what we wanted to understand is this generational shift that we're seeing happening, and as Chris said, if you look at it going from 75% to 86% from millennials to Gen Z, kind of what does the future hold, and there's certainly that shift occurring. So we set out to try and understand a little bit more about what's underlying that. And what we found was that millennials and Gen Z, their identity is formed much more by experience than things. And so this generation wants to be known for what they did and what they said, not what they owned or what they had. And so we saw that 3 out of 4 millennials would prefer to experience something rather than buy something. And what that does is then help to form this offline identity for them. And so whilst that's happening offline through live experiences, the same thing is happening online through new social platforms. And so if you think about your own experience with mediums like Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, there's still some crap cat videos and shit like that. But for the most part, it's your friends, your family, your network posting about life's experiences. And so you're constantly consuming all of this activity. And at the same time, you're posting it as well. You're sharing your own activities. And so you're creating this digital portrait, this social currency, and your identity through that. And so we see that happening in events as well. And so 1 in 3 post during. I can see Jared there on his phone. I'm assuming that's what you're doing. And 1 in 4 posting after.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said for that being seen to be doing something cool. I haven't thought this through, but let's wonder about this. That whole fear of missing out thing, there's almost a need to show off to show you didn't miss out. And that experience and the evidence of that experience becomes incredibly important. Interesting as well, the challenge of getting people from an online world to not quite get off the bums and do something, but actually leave the house, preferably without chasing Pokemon, which is a different issue. But for getting people from behind their computers actually to an event. And so integrations from streaming services like Spotify and Songkick has been a great way to try and use recorded music to drive live music attendance. That's been an interesting one recently. There have been a few other examples as well.
Yeah, a couple others I thought I'd share. So there's a number of ticketing companies at the moment working with Facebook on deeper integrations. And so that's about, again, making the transition from offline to online or online to offline, vice versa, more seamless and easy, so going to consumers where they are. And the other example I thought I'd share is Coachella, so one of the US's largest music festivals. In 2011, Coachella started live streaming the event on YouTube, and the conventional wisdom at that time was, to exactly what Chris was alluding to before, if you give someone the chance to sit on their bum on the couch and watch it, they'd rather do that than actually go to it. But in fact, what happened was the exact opposite. Attendance skyrocketed at Coachella, they were able to put their ticket prices up, they were able to generate new partnerships and sponsorships. And so we saw that through data as well, that 70% of millennials are more likely to want to attend an experience in the future if they've first consumed it online.
Yeah, yeah, that opportunity to give a taster. Here's what you missed out on.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't miss out again.
Fear of missing out, FOMO, there you go. Third trend we want to talk about is the rise of the influencer. And so, again, in the new world, we are bombarded by data. I think no one would disagree with that, it's information overload and it becomes just pure noise. And so to cut through that, a lot of brands have found success in identifying and leveraging influencers. And really that's been industry influencers or celebrities, and had success. The risk though of that strategy is though, as you pay people to do that, it loses authenticity, it loses credibility, and therefore it starts to diminish the power of it. What we're seeing as an increasingly powerful opportunity is that of small groups. And so if you think about you and your mates, there's always one or two of them that are there driving the activity. If you think about you and your mates, it's much more fun to go to a gig or an event with a friend than by yourself.
I'll take your word for that. It's never happened to me.
Yeah, well, we all live in different worlds. And you're much more likely to want to go if your friends are going. And so identifying these people that are these peer influencers is a hugely authentic and powerful channel for the industry.
Absolutely. And finding those guys who, as you say, will instigate, will drive, can be really important as part of your strategy. I mean, Benji from Pledge will always talk about those early adopters who bring you a lot of value, not just because they spend themselves, because they bring their friends with them in all sorts of ways. In terms of what influences people, so I think last chart of the day, quite exciting. You've got word of mouth, actual talking to people is the most influential factor when it comes to either trying a new band, going to a show, being influenced. So where do you take recommendations from? Word of mouth becomes incredibly important. So again, keeping with that theme of getting the online activity to then get offline and real conversations to take place is incredibly important. You've also got that social media post from a family and friend being much, much, much more influential than advertising on Facebook. Unsurprising, but always good to see it borne out in the data, because again, we'd expect it, but to see the magnitude of that disconnection is really important. I was concerned slightly for what that slide was. I hadn't seen it with the animation.
Yeah, I know, I only found that today as well. But
there we go.
Animation, it's your best friend.
So in terms of gig attendance, so let's talk about opportunities. Looking at Gen Z and millennials, broadly 40% of those age groups, the males, have been to an event in the last 12 months. 18 and 19% of females, respectively, have done the same activity. As we've mentioned, it's not that there's a disconnect in passion for music. It's not there's a disconnect in appreciation. There's no tech it's not a tech-savvy thing. It's not there's no explanation for me for this, but it feels like an opportunity.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so really there's two opportunities this highlights. One is that you've got a hugely engaged audience in males. And so from an online and offline perspective, from a live and recorded perspective, how do you leverage that engagement and drive more revenue as an industry? And the second is, this lesser engaged group as in females. And the kind of paradox is that Chris alluded to is, they're no less passionate. We saw no statistical difference in their passion for music between male and females. They're no less tech savvy. And they have exactly the same discovery channels for live gigs that the males have to access. And so we really struggled to try and understand what is then driving that. And we found that one of the key drivers is not knowing what to go to. And so the challenge for the industry then is that the existing channels aren't working to engage that group. And we've got to come up with new and innovative ways to do that. And so again, we think peer influencers and small groups could be one way to do just that.
Absolutely, and some focus energy on it as well to try and untap that group, because the risk is with kind of a lot of the data analysis you see at the moment is the risk is if you do what the data tells you. So I'm going to kind of quick moan about why data is not great, just undermine my day job, but it's fine. There's sometimes where data isn't helpful. So situations like for me, signing a band, A&R, it's interesting that you've got no Facebook fans, but I'd rather sign a band with no Facebook fans who sound fucking amazing than a band who sound great and have got Facebook fans. Especially if what I'm good at as a label is growing you from no Facebook fans to having 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. Feels like a good win to me. The risk is with the data that exists around live music at the moment, if you're not careful, is that you will always get what you always got, because you will look backwards at data and it will say, this was working, do this again, this is what we got to, and that pattern will perpetuate unless deliberate effort is taken. So one of the risks is with data, because it's naturally backward looking, it won't drive you in a new direction. It will keep giving you what you always got. I think it was Henry Ford who said if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Sometimes it's all right to lead and to take people where you're going when you can see an opportunity. Other times it's all right to look at this and see opportunity in a low number rather than failure. And so to recap, you've got an industry that's in transition, but that transition for recorded music is fairly well complete now. The debate now is not so much, can recorded music grow again, it's how big will it be? And the debate really is with streaming as to whether we're at the start of a hockey stick growth curve, which for those who never played hockey goes like that, that's a good thing, or whether it then doesn't actually grow much beyond the current audience. Because there's an argument that says if 1 in 5 people in Australia start paying for Spotify, for Apple Music, for Deezer, for others, that's a huge growth in the market. That's incredible. Or is it actually only ever a product for music fans? And have we essentially then tried to make a mass market product at a mass market price point that was never for the mass market? That actually was only ever about that top end consumer. So there's a debate to be had there. Live music's in good health, and there's more and more opportunity. We mentioned boutique festivals briefly. We think there's a big opportunity there. We can see kind of latent demand from people who are not paying at the moment for live or recorded music. We think there's opportunity there. And I think we've made a strong argument in favour of kind of a bit more of a gig promotion strategy to try and untap that audience as well.
Yeah, and look, just summarising on the three more specifically that we've uncovered. You know, talking about reconnecting passion with payment. Again, Australians are hugely passionate about music. This is really about how do we monetize that through various channels. Secondly, you know, the idea of the experiences generation. You know, we feel it's real. And how do you harness that? You harness it by curating experiences that are inherently shareable and that help people to form that identity. And third, the peer influencers. Again, we see that as a much more authentic and much more powerful channel for reaching your audiences and driving your brand. So thanks for listening. If you want to have a conversation about this, Chris and I are here all week. The report, as Chris said, is available immediately online, eventbrite.com.au/blog. My email address is phil@eventbrite.com. Your email address is
chris@mediainsightconsulting.com. That I promise you doesn't fit on a standard-sized business card, but there we go.
And it's fair to say I think we're definitely up for a beer after this. So yeah, grab us if you want to have a chat.
Definitely. And just to say, the report has got a lot more detail on everything we've talked about. Those trends are in a lot more depth. You've also got some other areas we didn't get to touch on today, just 25-minute presentation. It's well worth a skim read. And then come and harass us over beer for the bits you don't understand or the bits you want to know more about.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.